Thank you everyone for your time today. Just give me one moment. I'm plugging my laptop. Thank you. Matthew, it would be good just to get a brief sort of introduction from you
Yes.
before I start the presentation, if that's okay.
Hi everyone, I'm Matthew Lamy. I'm a Managing Director for RLB France, RLB-SQA. We're presenting today the webinar on risk management. Je vais dire quelques mots en français. I will say a few words in French, Kish. Bonjour à tous. On présente aujourd'hui notre premier webinaire sur le risk management, la gestion du risque, qui est un service qu'on développe chez RLB depuis quelques temps, en complément de nos missions de project management. Le but, c'est vous permettre de découvrir le type de mission qu'on peut proposer. C'est assez synthétique, en 1 heure, on n'a pas vocation à faire un cours complet sur le risk management, simplement à donner quelques guidelines sur les bonnes pratiques. Et je suis accompagné par Kish Patel, qui est un expert du domaine et qui est basé dans notre bureau de Londres, mais qui intervient déjà en France avec nous. Voilà, donc Kish, I will let you continue about yourself, about the service.
Sure. Excellent. Thank you, Matthew. So today, everyone, I've tried my best to translate the presentation into French so that you can follow what I'll be talking about. So please excuse me if the translation isn't perfect. Today we're going to give a presentation about risk management, and we're going to be covering an overview of what risk management is at RLB, the process that we follow, which includes risk planning, risk assessment, risk treatment, quantitative risk analysis, and risk reporting and monitoring. So I'm going to try and get through the top 3 or 4 points very quickly, so we can focus on the outputs, the QRA, and the reporting element, and the benefits that risk management brings to organizations and projects. So who is the risk management team? We've got Louisa, is our head partner, risk management lead based out of London, and I'm also one of the leads for risk management, trying to be the center of excellence for risk management activity across RLB, also out of London. My background is major projects, large rail projects, nuclear projects, and multi-billion pound complex schemes. So we'll give you an overview of what risk management is. So it's a process that allows individual events to be managed and the overall risk profile for projects to be better understood. It's a process to manage risk proactively and ultimately to minimize threats and maximize opportunities. A risk by definition is an uncertain event, and if it occurs, there is some type of material impact to the organization or the project. It exists at many different levels, and the way you approach risk differs, whether it's at strategic enterprise level, whether you're doing operational risk management or program project risk management. So what is the process? The chart that you see on the left is straight out from the International Risk Management Standard, and I'll use this as a guide as to how we work through the slides today. But ultimately, the main elements is in that central box on defining your scope, context, and criteria for what you will be managing in terms of risk, the risk assessment process, and what you're going to be doing about risks as you identify them and evaluate them. Recording and reporting and monitoring and review are also going to be the two other highlights of this presentation. So what this is trying to show is that risk management is an iterative process. It can be done as a short-term engagement, but this process is designed to be iterative so that it fosters continuous development for your organization and projects. You cannot address risks in isolation, so the process helps to identify risks coming from various sources and their dependencies and interlinkages. Risks can have impacts on other risks if they materialize, secondary risks. And as you're planning out your risk process, there would be an exercise to understand what you're identifying risks for and how you're supposed to be managing risks with a direct relationship to how those are related to the organizational project objectives. What we strive to what we want to achieve on each of those contexts. So who facilitates a process and executes the process? It's on large projects, you would typically have a risk manager. So just thought I'd quickly just help everyone understand the role of the risk manager, because that sometimes isn't so common on projects in organizations, quite common, but on projects, depending on how big your project is, to warrant a risk manager. So a risk manager ultimately bridges the gap between technical teams and leadership, executes a process and helps to identify risks early, to communicate risks throughout the organization, and ensure that the entire process remains proactive. The conduit for collaboration and communication, because as we know, on large projects, having teams talk to each other is always a challenge. So the risk manager is one of the conduits that enables that and makes it work well. And the risk manager is responsible for executing the risk management plan. So we'll go through what goes into the risk management planning in these next slides. So risk management planning, before you even start producing your risk register, identifying risks, we want to try and understand the scope of what risk management is. As I mentioned before, it'll be different for the organization, program, or project. Your objectives will be different. Establishing the internal, external context of risk management, helping you understand what may make the process hard to execute. And there are various techniques that you can use to do this. So internally, depending on how many teams you have working, depending on the type of organization, the industry that the organization or project is working in, that all comes into trying to structure the risk management approach and risk management plan. And once you have done those two initial steps, you're able to define the risk criteria. You know, if generally you're working on projects, time and cost and quality are the most common, but there's a process within risk planning to understand, you know, as you're identifying risks, are you going to focus on time, cost, quality, or do you want to focus on reputation, your stakeholder, your scope, the other metrics that can possibly come into play depending on the nature of your project? So scope, what are the limits of risk management activity? Is it on a project that's in design phase? Do we stop risks within identifying risks within design phase, or do we want to be identifying risks for construction phase as well? We just need to understand to what degree we're identifying risks and to help us focus. Is it for an organization? Is it strategic in nature? Is it for a project? And to what extent does risk management need to interface with the other teams on the project? So just briefly on the internal and external context, there are techniques that you can use, and if you're from a PM background, you're probably familiar with pestle analysis and also doing a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and pestle goes through the metrics, the areas that you would potentially have risks and challenges coming out that may make the process of risk management harder to execute. So you design your plan around this internal and external factors. Also, once you've established that, you have a think about what your project objectives are. So one of the questions I ask when doing risk management is so what? So what? So what if we don't do risk management? We're not going to achieve our project objectives. What are our project objectives? And inside of your risk engagements, you're trying to identify risks that impact your project objectives. Okay, so once you have planned your initial approach to risk, we try and identify the criteria that we are going to be measuring our risks against. And there's two elements to this. When it comes to defining risk criteria, it's what impacts are we trying to measure when we are identifying our risks, and how does that fit within the organization's and or project programs risk tolerance. And that might be a factor of limited budget, and therefore you need to start tracking costs. You need to deliver the project by a certain date. You got time elements. There are various quality elements on delivering the project, quality of documents, quality of the output. So you need to define your criteria, specify the amount of time and risk that might that may or may not be taken inside of the process. Many of you may have seen a risk matrix, and what isn't always defined are the colors, and the colors help you understand whether a risk is tolerable or intolerable, and that is dependent on your organization. It's very specific to your project and gets designed through the risk planning stage and goes into the risk management plan. So very briefly on the risk management plan, it's a key document that sets out, the who, what, why, when, how of risk management. It defines the context, defines the process, it defines your deliverables, it defines your roles and responsibilities, and ultimately the project director, project lead is accountable for the risk management plan. So it's the document to essentially execute risk management in the context that you're working in. And typically when you're working on large complex projects, a risk management specialist would be involved to tailor and help you work through the process of designing risk management. And this eventually will help you maximize the effectiveness of risk management activity on your project. It can't be generic. it needs to be very specific. So moving to the next stage, which is risk assessment. And risk assessment, there are various sub-processes part of this: identification, analysis, and evaluation. So it helps you answer these questions for when you're identifying risk: what's going to happen, the analysis, how likely is it going to happen, how much of an impact will it have, and then evaluate, which means once you've identified your risk, do you need to do something about it? If it falls into your intolerable risk range, then you need to act. And there are measures designed within the risk management plan to help you understand how you need to act on intolerable risks. So very briefly on identifying risk, there are many ways to do risk identification: through workshops, through checklists, through reviewing historic risk registers, interviewing subject matter experts, doing your SWOT analysis. Most common would be brainstorming, getting a bunch a collective audience from different areas of expertise to brainstorm your risk for the project. And that's typically one of the most common ways to do it. So once you have identified your risk, it is best practice to try and split your risk out into 3 different elements: the description of your risk, which is the cause, the actual event, the actual risk that will happen, and the effect. So cause, risk, the event, and consequence. And using this breakdown, using this structure, helps you record risk information in a manner that is globally understood. So one of the things with risk management is that a register can be very technical. If it's a risk coming out from your engineering teams, or the risk might be very commercial if it comes out from your cost or legal teams. So a risk manager helps to globalize the language that you're using so that everyone can understand it, to avoid misinterpretation in the risk, so that when it is communicated up the chain, the leadership change and escalation chain, you are able to clearly articulate what it is and help drive action. So going into risk assessment and the first risk analysis. So the first point at which you start analyzing risks is something called qualitative analysis. And we call this qualitative because sometimes you need to operate within a range and you're not able to put a particular cost on the impact of risk, or how long a delay will be on the delay impact of a risk. So you work in ranges, and this comes from your initial risk planning stage, where you're defining your criteria, and the criteria is then reflected in a risk matrix like this. So you got your likelihood ranges. I've demonstrated a 5x5 matrix approach in this example, and depending on your risk tolerance and risk criteria, you're able to define what those ranges are between a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 score. It's very much tailored to your project and your organization, and this helps you then to prioritize your risks once they have been scored. You apply likelihood from a scale of 1 to 5, and you apply your impact from a scale of 1 to 5. Generally, you multiply the 2 numbers together to get your risk score. That's just another example as to how the numbers get represented in a table. Okay. I spoke of intolerable risk and tolerable risk, and this comes out from your discussions about risk tolerance in your planning stage. And I'll change between the risk matrix and this table over here. This table over here helps you understand what action you need to take if your risk after analysis has been scored in a intolerable or tolerable criteria. It helps you understand how you will go about your risk treatment strategy. The colors help you understand where it sits on the table as well. We go into the risk treatment strategy. Apologies, this is not in French. Generally speaking, if you've got a risk that has a negative outcome, you can accept or tolerate, you can treat it, you can transfer it, or you can avoid it. And if it's got a positive outcome, accept, enhance, share, and exploit. These are globalized terms. They vary a little bit, but essentially the same in terms of strategies for risk treatment. So once you have decided after your risk assessment whether the risk that you've identified is intolerable, you need to decide how you will plan your actions to treat that risk to a level that is acceptable to your organization project. And it's important to articulate your risk treatment actions very clearly to help you understand where your initial risk assessment was and how you can get to your target or your post-mitigated risk assessment. You do this by developing SMART activities. And SMART is the acronym for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. We achieve our target risk score or post-mitigated score by measuring the impact of your SMART activities on your pre-mitigated or initial risk scoring. I've got over here an example of what good looks like. And I won't go into detail because I will share these slides with the audience and you can have a deeper read, but the top level message over here is without good information, you're not able to make decisions from the outputs of your risk assessment. And the clarity of the information that you're recording and the structure of your risk register is very important to help you make those decisions. Informing the risk register, only a select few team members should really have access to edit the information in the register. And I go back to my point on being clear and consistent and using common language through the risk register. And it's really important to do that because you need to be consistent as you're communicating information. If you structure your risk register with the outputs of your risk assessment and your actions aligned to best practice, you can actually create a workflow within your spreadsheet, working from left to right. You have your risk information that you've identified, your context. You do your analysis. This shows your qualitative analysis in this box over here. You decide through your risk evaluation what you're going to do, treat or tolerate in this example, and then you plan your actions, which is the risk treatment. You owners and you assign due dates. I haven't shown your post-mitigated analysis over here, but essentially when you understand the effectiveness of your risk treatment, you're able to rescore based on your post-mitigated analysis, and then decide whether your remaining risk exposure is acceptable to the organization. For large projects, a spreadsheet may not be the best tool to use to record your risk information. And when you have many interfaces, when you have levels of risk escalation, a risk management system generally is needed. And this helps to improve your risk data collection, structure it, assign security and access restrictions so that certain members of the team can only see certain information. For compliance, reporting, and business continuity, it's quite important to then implement a risk management system. And there are quite a number of software providers that help you do that. Okay, so the next level, once you have a risk register, and let's just hypothetically say we have 50 risks in the risk register. You can go one level further and do quantitative risk assessment. And quantitative risk assessment fits basically in between the risk assessment and the risk treatment phase, and it helps you identify the risks that really matter out of your list of 50 risks in your register, and it's specific to time and cost impacts. Quantitative risk analysis is useful as you have many risks in your risk register. It helps you understand things like confidence of achieving your program, confidence of achieving your budgets, and it helps you plan resources to better manage your projects and to make decisions. The quantitative risk assessment, it involves the assessment of cost and program to provide a realistic assessment of a likely outcome. It's calculated through a method called Monte Carlo. It's a statistical approach. You need specialized software to do this. And it provides outcomes and various confidence levels on those two metrics of cost and schedule. It gives you a probability of how likely you are to achieve your cost and schedule targets. So within quantitative risk analysis, you have two very discrete inputs, which we call inherent risk, which essentially is estimation or duration uncertainty, and your contingent risks, which are the risks that you identify within your risk register.
Kish, we just got a question.
Go on.
Hey Kish, it's Crew speaking. Just on the Monte Carlo software, right?
Yes.
Is that something we could access through the UK, or is it something that we need to buy a license for, or is it like a? It's not software. It's a methodology. It's a statistic methodology. I understand this. It's a methodology and it's a simulation, right? But is there like how do you use it? I mean, how is there like an Excel sheet, or is it like a software? How do we?
So just on the software, the UK team has access to At-Risk, which does cost risk analysis, and it's a software plugin into Excel. And we've also got schedule risk analysis software. We've got a software called Saffron Risk, which we do our schedule modeling on. You could reach out to the UK team to perform QRA, or if you need to be trained and you wanted to implement yourself, you have to procure your own license.
Okay, and then that's with What's that? What's the soft? Is there any way you can write in this chat the software names?
Of course, I'll
cheers.
give you
We'll add it to your
a
presentation.
list following this
Sweet.
this presentation, of course.
Cheers.
But we do give training in both techniques if anyone is interested in using quantitative risk analysis.
Yeah, 100%.
And I'm happy to support wherever it's needed. Okay, so
yeah, no, yeah, thanks for that.
That's okay. So this is an example of cost risk quantitative data. You have your probability, you have your 3-point estimates, and you're able to put that into at risk and essentially simulate your outcomes. This is an example of an output, and it helps you see the range of possible completion costs based on this, what we call a confidence interval. It identifies the likely anticipated cost of your project. For example, in this, we've got on the 80% confidence interval, you've got an 80% chance of your contingency. You've got an 80% chance of spending 3.5 million as a risk value on top of your budget. And there are what we call sensitivity. There is what we call sensitivity analysis or tornadoes. As you model your risks, you're able to see which risks have the most impact on that 3.5 million number that we had on that previous slide. So it identifies risks which should be prioritized for time and cost, for cost and schedule mitigation, which if you were purely to use your qualitative risk register, you wouldn't have this type of information. You'd have 50 risks, you'd have your top 15 or 20 risks, but then you wouldn't know which ones to prioritize, and this helps you with that decision making. Okay, so the benefits. During optioneering, it contributes to risk-based option selection. You can stress test your final costs. You can provide confidence in delivering against the actual and forecast budgets. You can better define what level of contingency you need for your projects, time and cost. You can focus on you place a focus on which risks, on the risks that matter, and it identifies potential costs posed once the risk has been loaded into the estimate. So it's not always an easy process to execute. You need someone knowledgeable in the field to do this, and we provide a lot of training to upskill our clients and internally with RLB in doing this. And the pitfalls, we try and help you navigate the pitfalls to produce a quality analysis. So, the pitfalls in using unrealistic or inaccurate data, ignoring all elements of uncertainty, the bias and level of accuracy within the estimates. As you go through the revisions of models, avoiding manipulation to essentially doctor your results, neglecting deterministic arguments, lack of reliable data. You got to sort of fact check and then make sure you're using benchmark data, and also providing realistic ranges. You can model your extremes, but you got to use reasonable values, and sometimes the theoretical modeling may not be reflecting of the actual operation. So you need like a check on that to make sure the model works well. Okay, so beyond quantitative risk analysis, you go into your risk review process, your monitoring, and the standards define pretty well how you can stay proactive in executing your risk process, and sometimes you have your risk review, but it may happen once every 3 months, once every 6 months. Someone decides to do a refresh on the register, but it really should be an ongoing passive element to delivering risk on your projects and organizations. At minimum, in most cases, it's a monthly exercise, but depending on the speed of your project, you might want to do it fortnightly. In some cases, digital projects, you do it weekly.
It's a very sensitive point, Kish, we can say it, because usually when we manage a project, a risk manager would come for a few weeks, establish a risk management methodology, and it's not updated on a regular basis. And the things that makes it work is that we have someone on a regular basis who updates it, because we can't update the action, we can't update the management if there's no regular update.
100%. It's an iterative process. You can't be using old information. The second your context changes for your project, you've got new change elements, your delivery strategy changes, it's obsolete. You need to keep it up to date. Really important.
Everyone who works on project on a regular basis knows that a project is living and there is change every day. So monthly is a minimum.
Yeah, 100%. So what goes into your review? Have your actions been completed? By completing your actions, has your risk exposure changed? Is that risk at that point in time becoming better or worse? What's the sentiment on the direction of that risk? Can we identify further actions based on the current context of the project? Has the project team done enough? And therefore we need to start escalating risks if they're still in the intolerable range. Are we identifying new risks, and are we closing risks? Are we resolving them? Some risks just expire. They hit an expiry date. They need to be struck off the register. But as you are reviewing and you're recording notes, this goes into your lessons learned process as well. All this information is carried over into the improved management of your future projects, or projects which are alike. So the key attendees within the risk monitoring review process, they're very much defined the risk management plan. That's why the risk management plan is very important, because when you don't have good participation in your workshops and reviews, you're not going to get good information. You're not going to get all the information that goes into your risk register. So that planning element is very important. And to finish off, you put it all together. Ultimately, risk management, it's to help make decisions. It's to support decision making, depending on how risky a project is. You might want to be risk taking on a project because you got lots of reserves, you got lots of contingency, or you're working in an industry that you need to take risk. For example, the development of AI, or you're working in an industry in nuclear where they're incredibly risk averse. They've got lots of controls. You need to be risk averse in your decision making, and a risk register and quantitative risk analysis helps you understand where you stand in terms of your risk exposure. And typically what you want to report are your total risks, how your register is changing, new and closed risks, general activities that you performed in the period that are relevant for decision making, your escalations, your top risks, And if QRA is performed, your confidence intervals, sensitivity analysis, and your tracking against contingency. Cool. That's the end of my presentation, and hopefully you enjoy that, and hopefully you've got a bit more insight into how we do risk management. Any questions?
Doesn't seem
Excellent.
like it. Yeah, just a comment. I think that was really cool. Thanks for that, Kish.
No worries. Thank you so much, Drew. And please do reach out to our team. We're always willing to help you work towards a best practice, and we are a center of excellence, and we want to standardize the way we deliver risk management as an organization. Ultimately, that will help us integrate this into cost, schedule, and project controls, project management processes, and ultimately help programs and projects deliver on time and on budget.
Kish, if I may add a few things,
Go on.
we see usually because on major project we see risk management. People talk about risk management, but may not do it as we would do it. I can say that we can have major impact on managing project if this part is not done correctly. We've said it with the regular update of the risk management plan and globally all the management, but there is also other type of discussion we may have. For example, when we set up an action, the action has to be smart. And if the action is not smart, nobody is going to be able to deliver it because it's not clear. For example, the things I see when I go and see project as expert, we have case where sometimes we have a risk like planning risk. This is not a risk. This is generic risk. It doesn't make any sense. There is always a risk on the planning, but what is the issue about the planning? Where is the impact?
100%. That's why using best practices and splitting out risk information in those parts, making sure your risks are being assigned to the right owners, to the people who have influence in managing the risk, the people who are interfacing with various teams within the project or internally and externally, assigning actions, tracking those actions. It's all part of the process. It needs to be passive and not even just point in time once a month. It needs to be ongoing. So
that's why usually we would use international standard like AACE, Institute of Risk Management. We've talked about ISO today. That type of things help everyone to understand what's a good standard and what's just generic discussion.
Yeah. And yeah, please do reach out. I can help you. I can point you in the right direction if you're designing your risk management process. It doesn't always need to be a 30-page long plan. It can be very short. It can be 4 or 5 pages. Get the main bits in so that people know what they need to do, and you're following a structured process. And if someone on your project is not, then at least you've got a document to refer to that's been brought in by your project leadership. Risk management starts at the top, needs to be executed from the top all the way down.
Would you be able to share any templates and examples of like risk plans and all that sort of stuff?
Got many.
Obviously, if you've got any confidential information, just retract it if you need to. But yeah, that'll be really handy for us to have here in the French office.
Yeah, sounds good. I will.
S'il y a des questions en français, vous pouvez aussi les poser en français. If there's a question in French, we can discuss in French. Doesn't seem.
Everyone's got my contact details, so I'll wait for the hundreds of messages that come into my inbox now.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for
Excellent.
joining.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thanks
you,
for joining.
Keith.